Now I'll give you a little introduction to CPT, Christian Peacemaker Teams, and then I want us to have a discussion, and we'll have plenty of time for questions, I hope, if I don't go on too long. Our work got started in the 80s. There was a movement to develop teams of peacemakers, nonviolent peacemakers, that would go into high conflict situations. And some of these dreams were very, very unrealistic. There were dreams of thousands and tens of thousands of people going into situations without training, but simply under the understanding that people of goodwill are going to do good things. We know that that is sometimes true, but it isn't always true. And so after refining this larger vision into a more practical thing, we were able in 1988 to begin forming, we began our staff work to form Christian Peacemaker Teams. And in brief, we have full-time workers and we have what we call reservists. And it's an outright borrowing from the military, reservists. And these are folks, both of whom are trained in a month-long training, and both of whom serve in the field, but full-time people for, of course, more longer periods, and part-time people for briefer periods. And the training, our kind of basic training, if you please, in CPT emphasizes the arts of entering a high-conflict situation and using what we would refer to as the arts of nonviolence. Of reducing violence, of getting sometimes in the face of violence, sometimes diffusing it. There are all sorts of things that can be done in specific situations. It also has to do with building team life. You know, us good people, we also have fights with each other. We don't always get along, right? Well, that's the way we are. I guess here you do. But anyway, so we have to kind of figure out some ways to get along with each other in the field. Usually our teams are 4, 5, 6, 7, and as high as 10 people sometimes. We also find ourselves everywhere we work, because it's a high conflict situation, we have to deal with issues of human rights. Now, we don't try to make ourselves into another Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch or the other specific groups that are available, but we train ourselves to interview people who have been the targets of some kind of abuse or imprisonment or what have you, and learn from them and try to get accurate stories. And we talk about a methodology so that when you're dealing with a number of people, you cross-reference and you attempt to get as nearly as possible the truth, and then we talk about what you do about it. And how the media and the internet and direct confrontation and a variety of things are needed to deal with specific situations. We are not always successful. We are not always successful. Sometimes we're successful. And then we also learn to encourage each other. We learn to have a little bit of worship time and pray together. And we also learn to have fun together, because it's really important to laugh once in a while when you're doing heavy stuff in high conflict situations. I think you all know that, don't you? Yeah, so that's another piece of our life. Now, I want to talk about Iraq. While Iraq was getting started, you all were still fresh into the recovery mode here. And so the invasion and occupation of Iraq began in 2003, in March, April of that year. We already had a team there, and during that the closing period of Saddam's period and the opening of the American period, there wasn't that much we could do during the Saddam period, except that we got our experience and we were able to identify connections. But when the Americans came, it was a less violent situation than most people anticipated in the immediate aftermath. Meaning that there was not an uprising of Iraqis and wholesale violence. And so the Americans kind of relaxed, and then within about a week or two, there was an eruption of all kinds of raids and stealing and so forth. Because at that time, the police disappeared, the military disappeared, and the American forces had no idea how to control the situation. It was really, really a difficult situation. So we were faced with the problem of what do we do? And at that time, there were something like 150 international NGOs, non-government organizations, poised to provide assistance in Iraq. And during that period, groups of Iraqis came to us and requested help for defusing ammunition that had been, released or left in the streets and so forth by various groups. Children were playing in it, and it was everywhere. And so they asked us, would we contact the U.S. command and ask them to do something about this? And most of the time, we did not get very much cooperation from them. Sometimes we did. Much of that then was captured by the groups, put away, and eventually became part of the resource for the war that came in 2005 and 2006. We were also contacted by a kind of an explosion of people who were trying to get their lives looked at. Women's groups, labor groups, political groups, and particularly Shia religious groups. And you'll know in Iraq, what has happened in the last 7 years is much like what has happened here, a division of religious groups within the larger Muslim community. It's a terrible thing. It hasn't ever existed this way before in Iraq. And so now you have a division, serious division, with walls, complete with walls. And so that was that. So agent provocateurs were beginning to work in both communities to bring this about. But anyway, that's a long story I won't get into. The Shia came to us and said, would you come with us and help us with particularly our people who have been, who disappeared 10 years ago or 11 years ago when President Bush promised to support us, and we had an uprising. And so there were fields near Karbala and Najif, all throughout the south, where thousands of bodies had been buried. And so they asked us to come, and they said to us, would you just do a little prayer service with us? And so we did that. And we would go to these areas that were, they were 5 acres or 6 acres or so, as many as 10, and you would have these graves, one right after the other. And on top of the grave would be, they were like, the bodies were just thrown there. And on top of the graves you would find a little bit of cloth, maybe a little bit of hair, maybe a shoe. There were quite a few shoes, just enough for a clump of something, so that the families could maybe come and identify what was remaining of these bodies. This is now 11 years after the event. And so we would join them, and we would do a Christian prayer vigil with Muslim support. And it was, I mean, it's a new thing for Christian Peacemaker Teams, but we did it. And it was appreciated, and I think it probably kind of, maybe it, I don't know if we did any miracles, so we certainly didn't do any resurrections, but it was I think it was a good thing to do, and it certainly built relationships. Now, during these early months of the occupation, something was happening that was disturbing the families of Iraq, and that was the disappearance of people. By August of 2003, at least 20,000 people had disappeared. And the disappearances were particularly the result of house raids. Groups of six soldiers that were trained mostly back in Texas, but sometimes in Wisconsin and selected other places. And perhaps British soldiers. I'm actually not as close to the story with respect to British soldiers. But they would go to selected neighborhoods within Baghdad and usually come about 10 or 10:30, maybe 11 at night after the family had gone to bed. They selected these houses based on gossip. They call it intelligence, or information, or perhaps someone telling a story about someone else that they wanted to get even with. There are all kinds of reasons for this. You need to understand that the Americans didn't have a whole lot of intelligence on Iraq before they arrived. So this was pretty much of an ad hoc operation. And they would go to the houses, break into the house, turn over the furniture, and then usually go away with particularly the young men and sometimes the fathers as well. So this was an enormous problem. People were coming to us, what can you do? I want to tell you one story. In early August, we were meeting with another Iraqi group, what you would call an NGO here, but it was, I mean, it was sort of a freestanding group that was kind of working with women in, which wasn't allowed during during Saddam's period. Anyway, we were consulting with them on some other things, and someone heard us talking down the hall and came and said, "Would you talk to us? My brother-in-law's children have been disappeared. We must have help now." And maybe some of you have experience here with people who have disappeared, and how, you know how gripping those conversations and those meetings are. So he said, "You must talk to the family. We will come to your house tonight." Okay. So they came that evening and appealed to us to come out to their house so that the full story would be told, and we agreed to go on the following Saturday. So we went out there, and this is the story. The father is a doctor, and the mother is a dentist. So it's a professional family with considerable respect within the larger community. There were 3 sons, 19, 21, and 23. One was studying to be a computer wizard. The second was studying to be an engineer. And the third was studying medicine. Now, that's kind of the trilogy of most desired professions in Iraq. So the family was well on its way to success. And one night, about 10 days before we got there, there was a knock on the door, the iron door. And people were awakened, and the oldest son, who has particular responsibility for security, he had a revolver, and there was some shouting that went back and forth, but he thought this was a group of robbers. Now you remember Baghdad had an enormous law and order problem during this period. There were no police. So he pulled out his revolver and he shot into the ceiling to try to scare the robbers off. Which I'd be surprised if that hasn't happened in your communities sometimes here. At least it has in my community in Chicago. Anyway, and then there was some more shooting, particularly from the gate into the house, and I mean, everybody was absolutely terrorized. And so the family was quickly moved out to the back of the house, And there was still a little bit more shouting and a considerable amount of shooting. And then it got quiet for a couple hours with occasional shooting, again from the outside. Sometime after midnight, the doctor, the father, emerged from the back and said, "Take me, I will come. You can take me now. I will give you anything, but please do not shoot the family." And his English was probably as good as mine or a little better. And so there was no reason not to understand what he was saying. Well, anyway, when he came out like this, out of the kind of the garage leading to the driveway, they burst through the gate, guns blazing, of course, grabbed the doctor and threw him on the ground. Then they went and did a quick security search of the house, grabbed the three sons and threw them on the ground. And then threw one other visiting young man on the ground. And the women were told to sit in the middle of the house while this special search or raid mission went from room to room and closet to closet, turning over everything, looking for any kind of connections that this group might have, this family might have to Saddam Hussein or Al-Qaeda or what have you. And this went on for 15, 20 minutes, and the house was a total mess, a complete wreck. And then they came back out, and these men were still on the ground, being held down by one or two of the soldiers. And the second lieutenant, who was in charge, went to Dr. Talib and said, "Are you such and such?" The name was not Talib. "Oh no," the doctor said, "that's somebody else, it's far away." and then the second lieutenant said, "Oh, we are sorry, we have the wrong place." And so they let the doctor up, and then they took the three young men up, marched them off to their car, their Hummers, and they said, "We will take them away for 2 days and then they'll come back." So we were out there now because the sons, no one knew where they were. The family was in complete shock, in disarray over this event, which is, of course, a very frightening event. They sort of pieced the house back together again, and they showed us the various bullet holes and so forth. And so they said, "Okay, Christian Peacemaker Teams, what are you going to do?" They didn't say it like that. They were very polite. It was quite a few. By that time, we'd had many, many cups of tea and several cups of coffee, which you really must do in the Arab world. This requires imagination, and so we said to the doctor, "How about going with us in 2 days to the nearest U.S. base, and we'll see what we can find out." So we went and found him and loaded up, and we went to the base 2 days later. And when we arrived at the base, probably not so dissimilar from some of your experiences here, there were literally hundreds of people in front of the base trying to get through to talk to somebody who had some authority in there and might know about the disappeared of their families. Literally hundreds. So it felt to us a little pushy and inappropriate to kind of push our way through this great mass of people, but we did, and got up to the guards, and we explained that we were the Christian Peacemaker Teams, which of course they don't have any idea who we are, and that we would like to see some responsible person to talk about this situation. And then a major appeared, and he talked to us, and he said, "Okay, well, why don't you come into my office?" So we went into the office, Dr. Talib and two of us. And then we ended up talking to this major, who was a reserve officer and was assigned through his Texas National Guard unit to Iraq to do this. It's called the Civic Action Group. I don't know if you have similar, you probably have the same thing in the British forces, but you may probably call it something different, but that's what we call it. And so the major, he said, okay, well, this sounds like a serious problem. And so he sat down in front of his laptop and went to work. And he was looking at something there, and he went through it for a while, and he couldn't find any information. Then he told us, well, I don't know what to say because I don't think I can help you. And then he went back and tried something else. And once again, he apologized to the doctor and said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You need to go to another office. And you all know very well how it feels to be referred to another office, yes? And so we kind of got a little bit pushy, and we said, well, could we talk to the next level up commander? And so we had another talk, and then they sent the battalion lawyer in to talk to us and to explain to us how this wasn't our responsibility and we should not be worried about this. And he didn't get very far, but anyway, we had a respectful conversation. And eventually we came out zero. And we ended up going then to another office that had been set up in this famous green zone called the Iraqi Support Office. And we already knew about that place, and we had been there with respect to a whole series of detainees that we couldn't find information about, but we went back there again with this case and a number of others to ask for information. But we had no success, and so now this is where kind of imagination and so forth come together in the work of Christian peacemaking, or peacemaking in general, I think. So we thought, well, let's go knock on the doors of some of these prisons. We knew where the main ones were. There was one at the airport, there was Abu Ghraib, there was Buka, and there was Qasr, down near the Kuwaiti border. Qasr was the biggest. It reportedly had 20,000 detainees. And that's what the military told us. And when we would go and seek information, they would say, the better ones would say to us, now listen carefully, what do you know? Because we don't understand how the system works. This is what they would say. We don't understand how this thing works. And these are people who are supposed to know. These are majors and lieutenant colonels and so forth. So this is 5 months into the war. And it was a closely held thing in the Pentagon, you see. So we decided we would try to work some of these prisons, but we thought we'd go to the biggest one first, Qasr. And at that time, we had a Catholic priest who was a member of the team, and he was a good person. His name was Jerry. And so we said, Jerry, you priests are supposed to do miracles from time to time, and so this is the time for you to go to work. And no, seriously, we said, Jerry, actually, this is one of the things we work with. We try to use all of the resources that are available, and we told him before he came to Iraq, bring your vestments along, because maybe they'd be useful. So we said, Jerry, get your vestments, and go with Dr. Talib down to Qasr. And when you get there, put them all on, as much as you can stand there in 120-degree heat. Put them on and stand at the gate, because if there are 20,000 detainees inside, you can be sure there's going to be hundreds of Iraqis on the outside trying to get in. And so Jerry said, sure, I'll be glad to do that. And so they went down. This is a long way. This is several hundred miles. I think it's between 400 and 500 miles, but probably closer to 500. And it's down near the border. So he went. They couldn't get in the first day, and the second day, after they found a place to stay overnight, they went there and were able to talk their way in, Jerry in all his glorious apparel, and the doctor. And then they talked their way past the guards, and then they talked their way to, they said they want to see the commander. And pretty soon, the woman, who was a general, And the commander came out to talk to Father Jerry. You know, it pays to be a place to be, yeah, it pays to be a clergy. Yeah. And there is a use for this clergy thing. It's useful, it's helpful. Yeah. And we're recruiting you tonight, right now. Anyway, so a very polite conversation, and the commander of the prison said, "Oh, well, we'll see what we can do to find them right now." And she went in, and about 2 hours later, here come the three sons. And they sat down and had a time together with their father and so forth. "When are you going to get out?" "Well, nobody knows." "Well, the commander of the prison said, I'm going to put a urgent on their files and try to get them moved through." So now we know that they're alive, and the family is a little bit less worried. So the situation, nothing much happens for several months. There's no further communication. In August of that year, the International Committee for the Red Cross had been blown up. Some 30 people were killed. And the meaning of that is that the communications between prison and families, prisoners and families, is no longer smooth. So this is what they have the one channel in the world to keep that open, and it was open to a few detainees, but not very many. It was also the period where the UN was blown up, and the Jordanian embassy and some other organizations. So in that period, many groups left the country because it began to become extremely insecure. I had to leave, and then I came back again in December, and so we did some investigation, and the three sons at that time had been returned, and they were home. And so we went as a team out to visit the family and to interview the three sons. Fairly exhaustively. We had 3 team members for that occasion. And we had really a celebration of joy and hope together. We had a big meal, and then we sat down, one of us with each team member. 2 of them, I would say, survived the ordeal in a very healthy way. They were still, their goals in life were together. They were at ease with themselves, and they were at ease with the family. The third one, which happened to be the one that I was interviewing, was troubled and had really bad dreams, and he was clearly angry. And he described one situation where the soldiers that were, I'm not sure, I guess they call it interrogation. It was pretty elementary interrogation, and it was just abusive behavior, and they held a gun to his head and then said, "I will shoot you now, prepare to die because you're going to die right now." And then a gun went off over there, and then they said to him, "Now that was your brother that was killed, and you're next." And so I mean, these are very abusive. This is terrorism, yes. And anyway, he experienced some bad things, and obviously needed time to get himself back together and to recover. So anyway, that's the story of just one family in the thousands and thousands of families in Iraq who had now experienced this detainee problem. So anyway, that's the story of just one family in the thousands and thousands of families in Iraq who had now experienced this detainee problem. We decided as a team that we would take 100 cases and we would try to understand what is happening in the system, how they were treated, where they were, what the families were informed, if they ever were informed, and so forth. And so we compiled it as exhaustive a report as we could. And we made kind of a tactical decision on that report because we discovered fairly early on that there was a fairly serious pattern of abusive behavior which we could hint at, but some of the stuff that came out in the Abu Ghraib scandal report in the media, we also were aware of. And the way an Iraqi speaks of this is not in the first person. He never says, "This happened to me," because it is just too shameful. They would simply say, "I know a person who was forced to take his clothes off and there was various activities directed at his body," you know, and they would, I mean, obvious sexual overtones. So this was also going on, but we didn't include it in our report because we knew nobody would believe us, you see. And you're in peace work, you want to get something done, you also want to tell the truth, and so you're stuck with kind of this sort of dilemma, and this is not an unusual dilemma. So we posted this report on the internet and did a press conference, a series of press conferences actually, and news groups from around the world came and said, "We want to work on this story, and we want to do a story for Japan or Germany or some other place, but never the American outlets." And however, when I went home in January, I was contacted by 4 of the 5 major news agencies in January and February, and the question always was, "Do you have pictures?" And my response always was, "We were not invited into the interrogation chambers." So we had the profile, but we didn't have the pictures. In the process of that unfolding period, we kept in touch with the military, and we provided our report and so forth, and I think it was kicked upstairs. In that, you know, you learn to know the higher officers, but you also learn to know the non-commissioned, the lower level folks. And they're the ones that make the military work, right? And they're also the ones sometimes who have kind of moral judgment. And in that process, at one point, a little flash card came to us for our computer, and it was a database, as much as they could get, for our work, which was somewhat of a listing of a lot of the political prisoners. It was a confidential thing. And occasionally this was updated, and this allowed us, when necessary and when we could, to inform families that, as far as we know, your son, your husband, and occasionally your daughter is in such and such a place. And that's actually, that's a big thing, to be able to say to the family, "Yes, we think your son or your daughter or your husband exists." Because when someone has disappeared for 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, I mean, it's just awful, you know, it's awful. And during that period, we also spent some time going to mosques, leading mosques in Baghdad and elsewhere, just to make relationships and connections, and that worked out really well. And it's much easier to be a Christian peacemaker team than to be a post-Christian peacemaker team or whatever else, because then it's clear who you are, and the Quran teaches respect for Christians and for Jesus and for Mary and so forth. That's another whole discussion. But we developed a whole set of relationships in the Muslim community, and that was enormously important later on when 4 CPTers were taken hostage, and we got really the most important support from the Muslim community and the second most important support from the Christian community around the world for the release of 3 out of 4 of those people. So, but the end of this story was the explosion around Abu Ghraib, which we were, I mean, getting that material together and working with it and so forth. I will take a little bit of credit that we contributed to the culture that allowed the military to, low-level military, to reveal their pictures, and the media to be open, and this whole process of getting the story of the detainees. Now it's not over, folks. When the U.S. turned over, or made this agreement for the U.S. presence in Iraq, that meant some changes, December 31, one of the things that was turned over was more than 20,000 detainees still down at Qasr and other places to the Iraqi government. And the Iraqi activists are absolutely outraged about this, because the nature of the treatment of detainees in Iraq under the present situation is approximately what it was under Saddam Hussein. So that's what we've gained in 7 years. That's what 7 years has gotten us. So the work goes on, and this is of course very discouraging, you know. So it means that our work requires decades and centuries. And but that's sort of just one piece of the work of CPT. And I wanted to tell you one or two more stories, but we need to have a discussion here. We had a team in Mexico. We were invited to Mexico, which is our neighbor, but maybe not so close to you, by a group of people who were sort of connected to the Zapatistas, but refused to fight. They didn't want to have guns. So that was a natural connection for us, because we're also into nonviolence. And they wanted us to just walk with them because they were being targeted, especially by military and paramilitary groups. In 1999, while they were in worship in a central location, 49 of their people were gunned down by a paramilitary group. It was an enormous explosion, and I mean, their sense of disaster was just enormous throughout the community. Now, this is a group of about somewhere between 20 and 25,000 people, and so we were with them for several years, from 99 to 2004. And we did a lot of walking through the mountains with them. We walked with them, went with them to Mexico City for them to tell their story. We did a lot of things together with them. One year, they asked us to join them in a Lenten fast. Now, I know all of you fast at Lent, is that right? Yeah, this is, I mean, I think of Ireland, you know, as this Christian, you know. So, good. And so this is not new to you. Anyway, they have a special way of praying there. I mean, it's none of these short prayers. I mean, it's at least 20 minutes, and it's on your knees. And every 4 hours. That means 12 o'clock noon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 8 o'clock at night, midnight, 4 a.m., 8 a.m. Yeah, I mean, this is serious stuff. This is not this easy stuff. And okay, we agreed. We had a nice team there, and I think everybody spoke Spanish and so forth, and we kicked off this fast. And the people, it actually got the attention of the Mexican media, and groups of university students had come down, and they'd find, this is way off in the hills. I mean, this is not in the main town. This is off. It's hard to get there. People were coming from all over Mexico to kind of see these folks who were fasting and these weird gringos who were with them. And they helped us, and we built a little campsite right outside the military base with a cornfield in the background. Corn for the Mayan people it's an important part of their tradition. And we had worked with them to plant that corn. And so we had this tent, and we had this, it was a prayer tent. And so every 4 hours for 6 weeks, we were on our knees there. And it was wonderful, really. I mean, this is fantastic. It's a little chilly in the morning. I mean, yeah. But anyway, it was great. And finally, brought this together as Easter came, and on the day before Easter, Saturday before Easter, they had a grand festival, and people came from all of their refugee camps and villages, thousands of people, really. It was a magnificent sight, these folks walking down the mountains to this place where this little military base was, and they were going to have a festival. Now the military, the Mexican military, they were a kind of a civic action group too, and they had doctors and they had dentists and other specialists to provide assistance. These folks would not accept one piece of candy from the military. I mean, these folks knew how to do it. They knew how to draw the line. And as that day unfolded, their leaders would come, and the military would come out, and then they'd have kind of a little discussion. You know, it was kind of very polite and firm. Let's put it that way. You all know what a polite and firm discussion is. So, and this went on, and then there was lots of food and mass that went on. I don't know how many hours. I mean, it was as long as I needed. Anyway, it went on for a long time, way into the night. And anyway, so we finally got to bed at our tent there. Of course, we had to get up again to pray. And finally, you know, Easter morning, we can, 8 o'clock, you know, the thing's over, we can pray for the last time. And so we go over and we have breakfast, and we look down, and they had painted the helicopter site, where the supply site for the Mexican army, and they put this magnificent Mayan sun, and they painted the whole thing. It was really very, I mean, it was a powerful experience to be with them through this. And later in the day, the military tore up the site and destroyed the sun and so forth, but it had kind of a wisp of resurrection, just a wisp of resurrection. Anyway, so that's one kind of thing that a Christian Peacemaker team can do. And they actually were able to win their struggle. They eventually were able to return to their coffee fields and so forth. And I see here, as I go from place to place, there's fair trade coffee, and some of it comes from their fields. And their fields had to be abandoned. Their trees had to be abandoned, and it's a big job to get those coffee trees back online again. Some of the things we've learned over the years is that nonviolent action, even in extremely dangerous situations, is safer than being armed in the work of pushing back violence. Safer. Now, I can't prove it, because you see, you can't set up a situation that is perfectly equal where you have a nonviolent group and an armed group. You can't do that. So you just don't know for sure. I believe that. And I think all of us in CPT believe that. But it's not just a good idea to believe in. We believe in it based on our experience. The second thing is that the work of teams of nonviolence, using the various fruits of our imagination and the history of nonviolence and so forth, teams create space for people to talk, to look at each other, to think about other options. That's our work, you see. Creating space. Think of it maybe as, yes, I don't know how to describe this mystical space where new things and new ideas and new connections can happen. Yes. The fourth thing is teams, I think, nonviolent groups anywhere, but organized teams, disciplined teams, they put armed groups on notice. They just put them on notice. We have some experience in a number of places of going to both underground and overground groups and just going and talking and putting a face on ourselves and on both sides, it creates, it just pushes some energy out there into the world where decisions are made. Teams, active peacemaking groups, talk to adversaries. Now that's not the only thing you do, but you talk to them and you can brainstorm some possibilities. This is pre-negotiation. This is not into the negotiation stage at all. The negotiation work only comes at the end. And that's a technical thing that is terribly important, but you've got to do all kinds of this prep stuff. Teams for us at least, we tend to be tilted towards the justice. You usually, in most high conflict situations, in crisis situations, somebody is more on top and somebody is more on the bottom. Now, maybe that's not your experience here, but in most places where we find ourselves, so we ask ourselves what is just, and that's everybody has their own ideas about what is just, but at least we don't just say everything is neutral. Being neutral is a way not to be involved sometimes. So we work with that. Teams who are disciplined and working together can have an influence on the media and through to all the media outlets, including the internet. And the final thing I would say, and there are many more learnings over the years, teams that really work well together need to be trained together so that we know and have common expectations. That's a little bit of our experience. I wish I could listen to all of you because you have more experience than I do.